Should we talk, Noah, if we may, about, obviously there's an enormous amount of turbulence going on, but this is fascinating. Let me just show you this. This is Labour's latest attack line on Reform UK. The most interesting thing, and if we can show you this, this is about them saying how many people they have deported. Now, what do you notice about this, Noah? The fact is, there's no Labour branding on it. So they're saying they are hitting a 5-year high in migrant removals. No Labour branding first. Secondly, I don't think they can do this, but they've done it in a Pantone colour, which is very similar, if not the same, as another political party, i.e. Reform UK.
Is this what their secret emergency cabinet meeting was about the other day? And they've just sat there and done this on Canva or something? Look, ultimately, is it going to turn the tide of the way that people are feeling about the Labour government? No. Is it going to partially, quell some people's concerns that they're not doing anything on illegal migration? Perhaps. But I think the biggest issue that they have to tackle is that the people that are most concerned about this are concerned because they're seeing it in their communities. And if Labour can't make them feel like something's changing in those communities, then they won't get anywhere. It doesn't matter what the reality is. This is mostly a perception game for Labour at this stage.
What does it say, Jim, when you don't put the logo of your party on it, when you have an advertorial?
It says the boxing clever. What they're doing, yeah, I do think it's clever.
Hang on a minute, isn't it passing off?
Remember, we're not in election time at this moment in time, so you're entitled to put out what you want. Now, what they're doing, Reform have been throwing bricks, if you like, big bricks, and they're aiming at, generally speaking, people who are, I use the word advisedly, not necessarily overly educated. In other words, lower echelons. And what Labour are doing is throwing bricks back. In other words, doing the same kind of trick, if you like. Call it that. Call it a game. Call it a war. Call it what you like. But they're fighting fire and fire with fire. So in other words, they're doing the exact type of advertisement as Reform have been doing against the Labour government.
Can I just double check? Did I hear you correctly? Are you basically saying that people voting for Reform or backing Reform aren't very bright?
I'm not saying that. There's polls out that say that, actually. I'm not saying it. I'm saying I'm following the polls that actually say that I say the majority, that the people, the education value in this country in terms of the top and the bottom, the majority at the bottom follow Reform. And that's not me saying it, that's a national poll.
Just because someone doesn't have a degree doesn't mean that they're not capable of independent political
I'm not saying that. Yeah.
But I want to hear from you, because I also would then, the counter-argument is, these are the people who work really hard, who struggle to put food on the table. They're sick and tired of what's happening in this country, and maybe that's why they're voting, is because they want change.
Yeah, that's the same rhetoric. Look, during the Brexit referendum, I heard people make a similar argument. I was very young at the time, but it left no impression on me. Yeah, just getting that in there. But it was the same argument that people made. And just because you don't have a degree doesn't mean that you are, not capable of objective political thought or thinking through policy issues. Those two things are not the same, and it's important that we differentiate.
Let me just show you the latest polls, if I can. If you have just joined us, it's 8:45 now. Let's look at the first poll. This is Find Out Now, and it is pretty seismic what we have seen. So this is the poll that shows that out in front for the very first time, 29% is Reform UK, up 2 points. Labour on 25 points. Conservatives on 18, down 3 points. Interestingly, Labour's gone up 2 points, which I find absolutely extraordinary. Lib Dems on 13%, Greens on 10. We'll bring you that poll, hopefully, as soon as we can. That is the first poll. We've then got a second poll as well, which is from YouGov, which pretty much says the same. What's going on, Noah?
I think this is what you tend to see in the early years.
There we go. There's YouGovs for you. Sorry. So Reform... I mean, this is pretty interesting. 25 for Reform. You can read it for yourselves, but... Noah.
Look, I don't think this is something that will last through to the next election.
You hope.
Yeah, I've said this to you before. I don't have a huge amount of faith that Nigel Farage is capable of holding a party together for that long and running a proper election campaign, whilst also growing the size of a party that much. It's something that requires not the skills that Nigel Farage has become famous on. You have to have a policy platform, and that's not something that's been his expertise. Fundamentally, he is good at leading populist movements.
Nigel Farage is not head of the policy unit, and there are people there. And Zia Youssef is a strategic businessman.
But people know Nigel Farage.
Sure.
He's the face. It doesn't matter. Yeah, I've heard you criticise Kevin Badenoch a lot. That doesn't mean that CCHQ don't exist. It's...
Nigel Farage, until the Reform Party, until they adopted Nigel Farage as the leader during the election campaign, were nowhere until they did so.
Well, that's not true.
So really,
that's not true, because when I was there with Richard Tyson, we were on 2%. We grew it to about 7-8%. When Nigel came on, it then grew exponentially.
But, 7-8% isn't going to get you anywhere in politics.
No, indeed. But also, Reform UK is a very young party.
Mm-hmm. But as Noah's already said, this is very early days. I mean, come back in 4 years. Things tend to change. You've got... The one thing you will say is 6 months of the Labour government is not enough to turn around the crash that happened under Truss and Johnson before. So it's going to take time, and I think people are aware of that. Yes, they're impatient. Yes, things are going on. It's not easy decisions that are being made at this moment in time. I think you've got to give the opportunity for them to spell out what they're doing, to actually make it.
What are they doing?
I think they're going through difficult times at this moment in time, but I think they're going in the right direction with several areas.
Tax?
Potentially, yeah, absolutely. In terms of the farmers, absolutely. In terms of their private schools, it's not going to destroy farms. No, it's not.
Destroying farms, destroying private schools, destroying aspiration, massive taxation.
All they're doing there is bringing the farmers into what everybody else has got to do. It's the same. You know, in other words, making it neutral across the board.
Look, Labour's policy platform has been abysmal so far. They've managed to somehow annoy lots of the Labour base. I appreciate you don't seem to be annoyed, but they're annoying a lot of the Labour base as well as the rest of the country. And I'm not entirely sure who is supposedly actually really happy with this policy platform, especially when you look at something like the taxation on private schools. That is quite obviously an attack on aspiration, and also an attack on lots of those special needs young people that were relying on private schools because, you know, state schools just couldn't provide the support they needed. Those are the people that are being attacked by this Labour government.
OK, pause, gentlemen. We'll continue after this break. This is quite interesting. Rachel Reeves, of course, there's this thing where Rachel Reeves has said, actually, the economy trumps net zero, and she has made this very clear repeatedly. Rachel Reeves has told Ed Miliband she's prepared to move further and faster to promote growth with projects like the third runway at Heathrow. They had this 6-hour away day, God, that sounds thrilling, on Friday, and now the net zero secretary, Ed Miliband, seems to have backtracked. He wasn't there when they made the announcement about the third runway, but no, he now says, oh, it's collective responsibility. I back a third runway at Heathrow.
Do you know what it feels like? You know when children apologise and they walk up to you and they go, oh yeah, my mum and dad told me to say sorry? And you know it's not genuine, but they've had to say it in public anyway.
Well, to be fair to him, he did say, apparently, he was in that meeting and showed displeasure about it, but maybe he's right. Maybe it is collective responsibility.
No, well, yeah, I quite like that we've gone back to a traditional cabinet rules where everyone kind of has to get on the same page. But it does make me question how long he'll last, because it's a pretty big backtrack from him on his previous position. And I've said since the beginning that Ed Miliband as DESNZ secretary made sense at the start, but I don't know about the long-term future of it, because he does seem to be quite far from the objectives, if not the actions, of this government on a number of levels.
You know, something you said, Jim, earlier, I think most people do want a cleaner environment, right? But it's about the timeline. I'm listening to Boris Johnson's book Unleashed at the moment. They had this arbitrary number, and 2030 seems pretty arbitrary. But surely I go back to this thing where you want to build the SMRs, get them up and running first. Keir Starmer's changed his position on SMRs as well. You've got Ed Miliband saying let's burn wood. You've then got windmills and great big pylons going across East Anglia, where I live, which people are very unhappy about. On top of that, we've now got this change from Miliband in terms of what they're doing. Is there a cohesive strategy behind this?
Well, you mentioned economic and net zero, or let's just say climate change, in other words, doing progressive things towards that. I actually disagree, because I think net zero, I think that what you're seeing from LA to Valencia to floods in Thailand to record temperatures going off at this moment in time to the record January 1.7 degrees globally, above the IPCC level, going in one direction only, means that in the end, climate is going to overtake economics. It will start to impact massively, and that's not me speaking.
No,
that's
right.
Deloitte.
Even if okay, so I'll take that point. But we contribute 1% of global emissions, right? Meanwhile, those economies like China, like India, building coal-fired power stations. So why are we doing this and making our citizens poorer?
Well, they're not building them; they're going to reduce them. And you're right at this moment in time. Yeah, look, China, the USA. India to a degree as well. All three of them are in the wrong place. Well, having said that, China is now heading both solar and wind power by a long way.
They're also building traditional power stations as well.
But they know economically that is going to be prosperous for them.
Well, they're also building the parts for us to buy to install here.
Just to be really clear here, if you have a look at graphs of greenhouse gas emissions, look at China and compare it to the US. They are not the same thing at all. And we need to be really clear about that. The US greenhouse gas emissions will be coming down and China's have not been. And we need to be very, very careful about stunting our own economic growth, because ultimately it's that's going to be the thing that provides the innovations, the technological advancements that get us out of this mess. We all want to get out of it.
But we don't have to get out of it by creating more of a mess in terms of the environment and putting more fossil fuel emissions into the air. We need to start pulling away.
But
we're not doing it. We're not doing it. The Chinese are going in the right direction.
What up? Look at a graph of greenhouse gas emissions.
You're missing my point. It's still a evolution. It's not a revolution.
I totally. But surely we need to make it affordable for people to adopt that transition. What I'm seeing is elderly people at home who've turned the heating off because they're too frightened to use it because the bills are massive.
Well, that's the winter allowance cut, isn't it? That's where it was. My old mum's in that position, to be honest with you. But you know, the certain thing. I think it's. I say this advisedly. I think it's exaggerated. I think it's pushed by the opposition in terms of saying that this is the worst thing that's ever happened. It's not the worst thing. People can do things in their own home to keep themselves warm, etc. You know, it is a case of managing that to a degree, even in a cold winter.
So my bill last month was £400. I don't even have heating on that. That's electricity.
Technological innovation is going to be what's in the long term going to bring those bills down, and the capital investment that's needed in the short term to make sure that the grid is doing all right.
Yeah.
But the crux here is we can't sit on our laurels, not invest and not innovate. That's going to be the thing that saves us. That's what we need to focus on.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Noah Khogali, Conservative councillor for Strathern, and Jim Dale, meteorologist and author. That was today's Head to Head.